A man walks into a luxury real estate office with $8 million sitting in his investment account. The building in front of him costs $3 million. He could buy it outright right now. No loan, no paperwork, no monthly payments. The agent assumes that's exactly what he'll do. Instead, the millionaire says something completely unexpected. "I'd like to finance the entire purchase." The room goes quiet. Why would someone who can easily pay cash choose to spend years making monthly payments instead? It sounds almost irresponsible. We're taught that debt is dangerous, stay out of it, own things outright, sleep peacefully. For most people, that advice is exactly right. But somewhere on the road to real wealth, the rules quietly flip. The same loan that buries one person in interest becomes the exact tool that makes another person richer. Same bank, same debt, completely different outcome. Most millionaires don't avoid cash because they can't afford it. They avoid it because paying cash can quietly make them poorer. Not overnight, but slowly, year after year, while their money stops working. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why, and you'll probably never look at a cash purchase the same way again. Here's where the misunderstanding starts. Most people assume all debt is the same. It isn't. Picture two people walking into the same bank on the same afternoon. The first wants a $50,000 loan for a new SUV. He has almost no savings, a modest income, and no investments. The second also wants $50,000, but sitting in her brokerage account is $5 million spread across stocks, index funds, and real estate. Both are asking for the exact same amount, but the bank doesn't see two identical borrowers. It sees two completely different levels of risk. One person is hoping a future paycheck covers the loan. The other already owns enough to repay it several times over. To the bank, those aren't similar situations at all. They're different worlds. That's why wealthy borrowers get lower rates, better terms, and faster approval. Not because banks like rich people more, but because rich people simply represent less risk. But the lower rate isn't even the real advantage. The real advantage is what the wealthy borrower doesn't have to do. Say you've spent 15 years building an investment portfolio, adding to it every month, ignoring the market crashes, staying patient. It's now worth $2 million. You find your dream property for $800,000. The obvious move seems simple. Sell some investments. Buy the property. Own it outright. Debt-free. Responsible. Except the wealthy investor sees something most people miss. The moment those investments get sold, they stop doing their job. They stop compounding. They stop quietly making more money in the background. And depending on what gets sold, there may be a tax bill waiting too. So instead of selling, the investor borrows. The portfolio stays exactly where it is, still growing, still working, while the loan covers the purchase. Think of it like owning a small apple tree that produces a little more fruit every year. Someone offers to buy the tree outright. You could sell it, solve today's problem, and walk away with cash. Or you could keep the tree alive, borrow a small amount instead, and let it keep producing for years. Wealthy people almost always choose to protect the tree because they've learned the fruit is usually worth far more than the loan ever costs. That's the first real shift in thinking. Ordinary financial advice focuses on owning things. Wealthy financial thinking focuses on owning things that keep producing value. Everything else is secondary, which raises the next question. If the wealthy are this determined to protect their investments, why are banks so eager to hand them millions of dollars to begin with? Because the bank isn't lending on hope, it's lending against something concrete. This is called asset-backed lending, and it changes the entire relationship between borrower and bank. Say your portfolio is worth $4 million and you suddenly need $500,000 for a new property. You have two paths. Sell part of the portfolio, trigger capital gains taxes, shrink your future growth permanently. Or leave every investment exactly where it sits, use the portfolio itself as collateral, and walk away with the cash you need. Nothing gets sold. Nothing stops growing. Let's actually run the math on this, because the difference isn't small once you put real numbers next to it. Say she borrows that $500,000 at 6% interest instead of selling. Over 5 years, that loan costs roughly $150,000 in total interest on a standard repayment schedule. That's the visible cost. The number that shows up on a statement every month. The number that makes borrowing feel expensive. Now look at what selling would have actually cost her. If that $500,000 sat in a position that had already doubled in value, selling it could trigger a capital gains tax bill somewhere around $50,000 to $75,000, depending on her tax bracket and how long she'd held it. Gone the moment the sale goes through. And here's the part almost nobody calculates, that $500,000 stops compounding. If the market she was invested in kept averaging 8% a year, that money would have grown to roughly $735,000 over the same 5 years. That's not a hypothetical. That's real growth that simply stops existing the second she pulls the money out. So line the two outcomes up side by side. Borrowing costs about $150,000 in interest over 5 years, fully visible, fully predictable. Selling costs a tax bill up front, plus roughly $235,000 in growth that never gets to happen. The loan, the option that feels expensive because there's a number attached to it every month, ends up being the cheaper choice once every cost is actually counted. Selling just hides its true cost in what never happened, instead of putting it on a statement where you'd notice. This is exactly why so much conventional advice about avoiding debt falls apart once someone reaches a certain level of wealth. That advice was built for a situation where your money isn't growing fast enough to outpace a loan's interest rate. The moment your assets are compounding faster than what a lender charges you, the entire calculation flips, and paying cash quietly becomes the more expensive decision, even though it still feels like the responsible one. Most people are taught to save money so that one day they can spend it. The wealthy build assets so that, ideally, they never have to sell them at all. That single shift changes everything downstream. Because every asset left untouched gets another chance to compound, another year to grow, another opportunity to create more options later. This is also why wealthy people don't casually spend down their portfolios, even when they clearly could. Every asset works a little like an employee. Imagine a company with 100 workers, each producing value daily. Firing 20 of them just to buy something flashy might feel satisfying for a moment, but the company produces less tomorrow. Selling investments works the same way. Every dollar sold is one less dollar working for your future. So instead, the bank's money quietly covers today's bill, while the investor's own money keeps working in the background, undisturbed. If you're wondering how the ultra-wealthy ever actually spend their money without constantly cashing out, private jets, real estate, business acquisitions, you're circling one of the more misunderstood strategies in finance. And it's worth pausing on before we go further, because this is exactly the kind of thing this channel exists to unpack. If it's already reshaping how you see your own next big purchase, that's the point. Subscribe, because we'll keep going deeper into these systems. Here's the strategy. Imagine spending 30 years investing every bonus, every spare dollar, every business profit into appreciating assets. By your 60s, that portfolio sits at $15 million. On paper, you're wealthy, but if you suddenly sell $2 million of it, you've created a massive taxable event. A single decision that could cost hundreds of thousands in taxes. So instead, wealthy investors borrow against the portfolio rather than sell from it. It stays invested, still compounding, while the loan provides spendable cash. Inside wealth management circles, there's a phrase for the full version of this approach: buy, borrow, die. Buy appreciating assets, borrow against them instead of selling whenever cash is needed. And eventually, when those assets pass to heirs, tax rules in many places allow much of the unrealized gain to be reset for tax purposes, something commonly called a stepped-up basis. The exact rules vary by country and change over time, which is exactly why wealthy families plan this carefully with tax and estate professionals rather than treating it as a shortcut. Think about what that actually accomplishes. For decades, the assets kept compounding. Cash was accessed through borrowing, not selling. Most of the original investments were never touched during that person's lifetime. The goal was never dodging taxes for its own sake. It was letting the money keep working for as long as humanly possible. It's like owning a factory that earns $500,000 a year. You could sell the factory every time you need cash, or you could keep it running and borrow against its value only when necessary. 20 years later, one of those choices leaves you dramatically richer, and it isn't close. The factory isn't valuable because someone might buy it. It's valuable because it keeps producing. So how do you actually know if a debt is working like this, or if it's just debt? There are 3 simple questions worth asking before borrowing against anything. First, is it backed by something that's already appreciating, not something that starts losing value the moment you buy it? A stock portfolio or a rental property qualifies. A depreciating car or a maxed-out credit card does not. Second, does the realistic return on that asset actually outpace what the loan costs in interest? If the loan costs more than the asset is likely to earn, the math never works, no matter how the strategy is packaged. Third, could you comfortably keep repaying it even if that asset's value dropped for a year or two? If the answer is no, The debt isn't a tool anymore. It's a bet. And one bad year can turn it into a crisis instead of a strategy. Those three questions are the actual dividing line between smart leverage and financial trouble. They're also exactly why this strategy looks completely different depending on who's using it, and why copying the surface behavior without the underlying foundation is where people get hurt. Now, this is exactly where people get the lesson backwards. They hear the wealthy borrow instead of paying cash and think the answer is simply borrow more. It isn't. Debt by itself creates nothing. It only amplifies whatever financial habits already exist underneath it. Give two people the same chainsaw. One builds a house, the other destroys his own fence. The chainsaw didn't decide the outcome. The skill behind it did. Debt works exactly the same way. Without appreciating assets underneath it, borrowing gets expensive fast. Without steady income, it gets stressful. Without real discipline, actually investing what you didn't spend, instead of quietly blowing through it, the entire strategy collapses into just being in debt with nothing to show for it. There's also a real danger sitting underneath all of this. Leverage cuts both directions. If the market drops and the collateral backing the loan loses value, a lender can issue a margin call, demanding more collateral or immediate repayment, sometimes forcing a sale at the worst possible moment. This only works for someone who can comfortably survive a bad year without panicking. That safety margin isn't optional. It's the actual foundation the whole strategy depends on, not an afterthought. Which is exactly why you should never compare your situation to someone who's already built a fortune this way. They spent years, often decades, building businesses, taking calculated risks, and creating assets worth borrowing against before debt ever entered the picture for them. You're only watching the final chapter, not the first 20. So if you're still building your foundation, the lesson isn't go get more loans. It's go build more assets. Assets create choices. Assets attract better financial options. Eventually, assets let your money work harder than you do. Now go back to that real estate office one more time. The millionaire signs the loan papers. The agent still doesn't quite understand why. He shakes hands, smiles politely, walks out with the keys. From the outside, it looks like he just took on $3 million in debt. But behind the scenes, his portfolio keeps growing. His businesses keep generating income. His assets keep compounding, completely undisturbed. While everyone else in that room sees a monthly payment, he sees something else entirely. Time. Time for his investments to keep working. Time for compounding to keep doing what it does best. That's the real invisible advantage underneath all of this. Not the loan, not the bank, not even the interest rate. Time. And the discipline to never interrupt it just because paying cash felt like the responsible thing to do. Somewhere out there right now, someone just walked out of a dealership or a closing table having paid in full, feeling proud of the check they just wrote. They have no idea what they just gave up. If this changed the way you think about your next big purchase, that's exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe, and we'll keep breaking down the parts of money nobody explains clearly.